Welcome, I'm Denise Graves, and you're watching Opera America's Oral History Project.
Again, thank you so much, Hal. You know, our 50th anniversary was stopped short by COVID. And part of our goal in our 50th anniversary was to do at least 50 oral histories with people who've helped shape American opera over the last half century. So now that we're a little bit back in the swing, we thought we'd pick that up. And I'm just so grateful to have this time with you.
Well, thank you. I don't know how I'm in the category of 50 who shaped, but I certainly am amongst the many who benefited from it. So I'm happy to talk about my experiences.
Well, fantastic. And as I always do, I like to start by asking, who brought you to your first opera?
Oh, well, that's a very good and a very interesting story. I don't know it's actually an opera that I can say, but I guess I'd have to credit my grandmother, who loved Joan Sutherland and Marilyn Horne, and was someone who listened to the Met broadcast from her early days as a teenager growing up on a farm, and then took it all the way through her life. And so she was always listening to opera. She stood out in the cold to get tickets to Carnegie Hall performances of those her favorites. And Vladimir Horowitz was in that, Rubinstein was in that category, and certainly she never stopped talking about those two singers when they had that great time that they were stunning the world. They made such an incredible sound in all of those bel canto operas that they did. And I came from an Italian family. So my grandmother and grandfather were Italian. And so the language and all of that was around our house. That said, I rejected it completely until I got into college. And opera came very late for me. As did classical music. I had lessons. I have a very musical family, everybody, and I was good, you know, but I wanted to be a quarterback. I didn't really have any interest in doing that. So my entire high school was spent devoted to sports. And then when I got to college, I kind of saw the end of that line, and in searching for something, I found music. And so then I found the piano, and the piano led me to my undergraduate degree, which led me to realize that line was going to end. I was not going to be Ben Clyburn. And so I found the rehearsals for the Magic Flute at the Aspen Music Festival with James Conlon. And that led me to Juilliard. And then I would say I started seeing operas all the time, because I'd go to the Met, and I was studying at Juilliard, and I was coaching at Juilliard. And so I don't have a typical background, I think, in that way. But once I took on the whole idea of theater and music together and started to work on it, it never left me. It was something I wanted to do. And then somewhere in the middle of all that, I decided I wanted to become a conductor, because that was fun. And I probably wanted to be in that kind of position, you know. And
well, it is a kind of musical quarterback, isn't it?
Thank you for making that distinction. Yeah. So yeah, and so I went back to school. I studied conducting at University of Cincinnati, and that led me to all kinds of great things. You asked a little question. I'm probably going into questions 3 and 4 here, but while studying conducting, I would spend the summers at different festivals coaching or playing the rehearsal pianist. So I had a summer at Glyndebourne, and I had several summers at Wolf Trap. And my first summer at Wolf Trap, I met John DeMaine, who's very important in my life, as was John Nelson. They were sort of 2 really important mentors for me. And John DeMaine was, of course, the music director of Houston Grand Opera. And so that was my first job out of college, was to go down there and be his assistant, which that was a treasure trove of experiences for me.
It is coincidental that in the sequence of recording these interviews, my most recent one was with John DeMaine. So it's a nice connection here. But I was fascinated within your story there, and because I know you went to the University of Vermont, and and you talked about you went to Aspen. not everybody goes from discovering music as a love in college and at University of Vermont. It's not known as a music school, but there you are playing at Aspen. I mean, how did that happen?
Well, Aspen was a great place to go in the summertime. I went to Tanglewood as well. I mean, for me, and this is what I say to young people, you know, your summers are invaluable for your furthering and deepening of your contact with the thing you want to do. You meet people that you haven't met, your horizons broaden, you see what the possibilities are. Every time I went to one of these summer programs, I came away a different person when I went back to school in the fall. Aspen was, you know, everything is coincidental in life. You know, I met John Demain at Tanglewood when I was sneaking into the Tanglewood chorus. And then years later, I was his assistant in Wolf Trap. I went to Aspen to study piano, but I decided I didn't like my piano teacher who I'd gone to LA to study with, and we had a breakup and I had nothing to do. And they needed a pianist to play for the Magic Flute at the Wheeler Opera House. So there I was, cramming my first opera into my fingers, you know, and it was so different. I mean, I was a good pianist, and but it was so different because opera, it's not just a pianistic thing. It's a sort of picking in the hole. So there were so many things, but anyway, that's how that happened. I mean, I kind of worked my way up the ladder in the music school realm, right? I went from Vermont to Northwestern, where I got my degree, and that was more of a music school than Vermont was.
Right.
And then I, you know, found my way. Every summer I was going to Aspen, and then I went to LA to study with Albie Circo, who was a great teacher. And then I followed him to Aspen one summer, and that's when the opera thing happened. So that's how that happened. Yeah.
When did the conductor idea really take hold in all of this?
Very interesting. My first fall at Juilliard, I was under fire. Martin Smith, who ran the program in Aspen, also ran the program at the AOC, the other AOC, which is called the American Opera Center. And he hired me as a fellow. And so I was playing. My first production was with Bliss Hebert and Manuel Rosenthal and George Balanchine. Can you imagine? I was playing for George Balanchine in an American premiere of, they called it The Reluctant King, Le Roi Malgré.
Mm-hmm.
And it had a ballet in it that Balanchine, over all of his years at City Ballet, had always put as one of his big showpieces. So he choreographed the students at Juilliard, and I was playing for all of that. And you know, it was a tremendous experience. But even halfway through, I was saying, I don't want to do this all my life, because I want to do what he's doing. And so, you know, I immediately started to form, well, I'm not ready to do what he's doing, you know. And by the way, you know, so many great conductors have come up the ranks through that process.
Yeah.
And I probably should have stuck with that longer, because you learn scores much better as a pianist than you do as a conductor. But anyway, that's how that bug bit me, and it was already there. I had sung with John Nelson in a choir for many years, and I was kind of a sort of unofficial assistant to him for a number of years. So I saw what the conductor life was, and then I started to work with John Demain, who was an amazing theater creation. You know, I mean, he is. I learned so much from John. A real musical theater man, and
absolutely, and
so
he would own that. You know, that musical theater and opera are such a seamless continuum for John.
Exactly, and it ended up being very much. You know, I was lucky enough to get into that place, which was the Houston Grand Opera, and it was such an interesting place because it was starting to make its mark as this sort of one of the real sources from which American opera was flowing.
Right.
At the same time, it was trying to be an international company, and it was, of course. And so in 1 year, you know, I was working with Hal France, who was directing his first opera, Carlisle Floyd's Willie Stark, which I conducted after John left to go back to Houston. I was at the Kennedy Center. So that was my debut. So I got to work with people like that. And of course, in those years, we also did Showboat, and we did Sweeney Todd, and we did Candide, because we were Houston Grand Opera, and we did Philip Glass. We did a lot of things, and we did Leonard Bernstein's Quiet Place. And I got to work with Leonard Bernstein, which of course was amazing. But at the same time, I also made a debut working with Jean-Pierre Ponel. By accident, I conducted his Bohème with Morella Freni and Julia McGinnis and all these people. That's how I had this opportunity to be part of two really strong strains of the opera universe, the more contemporary and American part, and the international. So it was an amazing place for me to be.
Oh, how spectacular. Because I have in my notes that you made your debut at the Kennedy Center in 1981. I'm sorry to remind you that that's 40 years ago now.
Yeah, how about that?
And it was Willie Stark. So it was Willie Stark.
Yeah, Willie Stark. Totally not ready for the opportunity, but somehow I survived it. I conducted 12 performances of that. I sort of had one rehearsal to take it over, get it under my belt. John did the opening and and then he had to go back, and then we later recorded it for great performances, and John, of course, was conducting that. But it was a great experience with Tim Nolan as Willie Stark, and just this amazing cast of singing actors. Don Gerard, I remember well, and just so many wonderful people. And I loved it, and it was really exciting for me because Hal Prince would come and watch it because he was getting ready to film it, So I mean, I really had exposure to some amazing people.
I should say, I mean, just the names you've already mentioned, whether it's Bernstein or Balanchine or others.
Yeah, this is the name dropping interview. So by the way, this is all coming out of me. I feel embarrassed to talk about this with anybody else, Mark. So you've given me an opportunity to brag a little bit. It's not really bragging about me. It was an amazing bit of good fortune.
Absolutely. And what I really enjoy about these oral histories is an opportunity to ask someone, what was it like watching Balanchine choreograph? What was it like working with Bernstein on an opera? What were these people like? Balanchine choreographing. What was that like?
Well, this is what I will tell you, what you learn almost without a question. These iconic people who have these sort of larger than life identities are often the most generous and the least iconic acting people.
Mm-hmm.
And I would say of both of them, and of course, I didn't have great contact with George Balanchine, only to say that he was complimentary to my playing. And he said, we've never used to do this with only one pianist. We always had two. And you're doing a really good job, that kind of thing. That was nice. Yeah. It wasn't hours spent. I spent more time with Lenny Bernstein because it was a full rehearsal period, and John was conducting it, so I was assisting. So I got really to be with Leonard Bernstein and everybody says Lenny and I always feel bad about saying it because he is an icon, he is a god, but he is Lenny. Everybody who's ever met and worked with him really thought of him as Lenny because he made sure that you felt comfortable. He was so supportive. And so, I learned so much from him. He conducted the Houston Symphony while he was down there. And so we got to watch him work as a conductor, but very humble about his opera, of course, and very concerned. He put so much into it. And I got to sit with him for all the rehearsals and take notes. And he was, I thought, well, here was a guy who had a photographic memory, who conducted almost everything he did from memory, who seemed to be always able to sit down and play the most complex music at the piano keyboard without a stitch of music, without even thinking about it. And he was complimenting me on my ear, that he thought that, he took my notes. When I said something, a balanced note or something, he said, yeah, that's right. And he was very supportive. So that's those are my stories there. The big story with Bernstein was that the very first moment he walked into Houston, and of course he came with quite a group of people. He had his publishers, and he always had a couple of assistants around. And he walked into a rehearsal that I was conducting of Trouble in Tahiti, which was our first reading, and the music's the parts weren't in great shape. But I was so nervous, and I was so not ready for that. And it was really a tryout for me to maybe conduct that. That was the first act of the evening. It was Trouble in Tahiti followed by Quiet Place. And I failed the test. So after that, they thought, well, he's not ready to do this. But it was so interesting after that moment that he was so warm and supportive of me throughout the whole process.
Yeah.
So great man.
It's wonderful to hear. And while we're talking about some of the iconic people in your life, your relationship with Carlisle and the work of Carlisle. Carlisle just turned 95. I the honor of course, knowing him and just knowing what an incredibly gentle person he was, what a gentleman. What was your relationship with Carlisle like?
Well, first of all, Carlisle, if you're watching, I love you and thank you for everything you did for me in my early years. Carlisle, well, my first chance to work with Carlisle was as the composer of Willie Stark, but he also was one of the co-directors of the Houston Opera Studio. And we did workshops of new works. We did a piece by Richard Warlow back then. And so Carlisle, I first got to really work with him more as a teacher and then as a composer. Everything has its ups and downs. My first orchestra rehearsal of Willie Stark, I know he went to John and he had some questions and doubts about my ability to do it. But he ended up being such a great friend and supporter in my life because I next got to work with him as a director, and he was he's a fine director. So we first did Madame Butterfly in Minnesota Opera, and then we did Jonathan Wade. We did it in Seattle and down in
Miami.
Yeah. And so I got to be with Carlisle, and later on, I never did it with him, but his Cold Sassy Tree was something I greatly admire, and got to do that several times. And I think out in Utah, he came and spent some time with us. I think that might have been the last time I saw him. But, for years, I've wanted to reach out and say, Carlisle, you just did so much for me. A real, of course, his approach to opera was, he really understood the art form and how it needs to work. And there was so much interest, sort of interior look at operas through the composer's eyes that I was able to get through my friendship with him.
So, we're talking about Houston Grand Opera and Leonard Bernstein, George Balanchine, Carlisle Floyd, Kennedy Center. Then 1984 to Mobile, Alabama.
Right.
And taking responsibility for a smaller opera company and what it put us on stage and how it did. What was that shift like, going from a rather grand tutorial into a smaller company setting?
Really, quite honestly, the smaller company setting is where, from that point on, I spent most of my career, and regional opera. And to say that was an interesting change. I was with friends. I was with David Gately, and we had a wonderful cast doing The Daughter of the Regiment there the first time. And I loved meeting the people, and it was a new culture. I had never been to Alabama, but as the years went by, I used to stay at Catherine Wilson's house, and she was once the director of the company, and then sort of passed it along to Pat Pierce, who was a lifelong friend. It was interesting. We went. Eb Swingle was the chorus master, and he was the brother of the famous Swingle singers of Swingle Singers fame. And Ed was a consummate musician, but a very quiet man. And he had this wonderful band of dedicated choristers. And that is an icon in itself, because that component is a group, a collective of people that are in most all the opera companies. And it's changed over the years because companies have gone more professional and less amateur. So 84, you're 20 years out of the forming of lots of these companies.
Mm-hmm.
And now we're 40 years, as you pointed out, 40 years past it. And what's happened is it used to go from sort of support groups that used to do the props and the costumes and all.
Right.
The Opera Omaha had this great craftsmen's guild for years and years, and still does, but they used to do everything. And then little by little, it got professionalized. Chorus too, it used to be completely no payment. And so, going to Mobile was a real change, but a welcome one, because I really enjoyed making a show with people and, kind of working with them from where they were. And every city was different. I spent a lot of years traveling and going, doing the regional circuit, and every place was different. There are lots of different pockets of different ways of looking at opera in the country.
And why did the smaller company, what you call the regional circuit, what about that spoke to you as part of the American opera spectrum? Here, Houston Grand Opera, and an international company, and one that is a leader in American opera production. And you conducted it at many of the finest companies. Not that these smaller companies aren't fine in their own way, but what about that smaller company spoke to you?
Well, I think, for example, Beverly Sills came here and opened the Orpheum Theater in 1976. Renee Fleming did one of her early things here in 1990.
I was there.
Were you? Okay. Stella Zambalis was in that cast too. Yep. Those people, when they came to places like this, did not act like I'm above this, because there was something for even people who were going to be at the Heights all the time. That was so refreshing to be part of a place that was kind of more like doing it for the love of it rather than sort of a higher professional purpose. Mm-hmm. And I think that spoke to me too. Opera Omaha, of course, which really became my company, had a tradition which John Demain and Mary Robert really started. But even before them, there were so many people. I mean, in the 70s, just about every American singer who then became very well known, from Frederica von Stade, who else? Maria Ewing, Sam Raimi, they all were here as younger singers. There was a great tradition, and there was an expectation of excellence amongst the leadership. And so you had to reach that standard, but they were still people doing it, not getting paid a lot of money to do it. And that would go from people that were doing our stagehands, our designers, our Craftsmen's Guild, our Omaha Symphony, everybody. The way it was a real team effort. And I guess that ended up being my mantra for why I did opera, which was that I liked the team aesthetic. Yeah. I liked the idea of this is what we're doing this. And it was stronger in some ways in regional situations where it had to by necessity be that way.
Yeah. You've also done some symphony conducting, and of course, the symphony performance doesn't tell a story quite the way opera does, and it's not quite as collaborative as opera is. But does symphony work also inform your opera conducting? Is it an important aspect of your work as an opera conductor to do symphony?
Well, of course, I would say coming up the way I did as a pianist, going into conducting in that route, I always envied the people that took the orchestral route, because in some ways I felt like that was the highest art of the conductor, and I missed not having as much of a background in that when I started. And quite honestly, I tried to get into the Exxon program. I tried lots of things, and I never succeeded. And I found in general, being an opera conductor, I was viewed differently by the symphonic realm and did not get opportunities. The opportunities that I did get were largely through doing gala concerts and performing with opera stars. Right. My ex-wife being one of them, Sylvia McNair, who was spectacular and all of those things. I got so many opportunities through that. But also Sam Raimi, I did The Date with the Devil with him several times. That was one avenue. But in Orlando, I had the one thing that never happened to me. After I conducted The Barber of Seville, the manager of the orchestra came up and said, would you come and do some concerts with us? And that was the opening I'd been waiting for. So now I got to do Haydn and Mozart and Beethoven, and I became the music director down there for a short time. At a time when sort of the usual symphonic things is broken down. That orchestra had some financial problems and was reconstituting as a non-union orchestra, and it was being run by the players. And so that was it was a great time of about 10 years of working with them that I learned so much, and I became a better conductor. And did it inform my opera work? You bet it did. That's a very important piece of all of this, is that when you first start to bring the orchestra into the process, and they come in later, you've been working a couple of weeks, and then enter the orchestra, that the way bringing them in and making them feel a part of the process is, when you have a success, that's because you did that. Wow. And yeah.
You know, I hear from young conductors the challenge of how do you audition? Here at the Opera Center, we have lines of singers waiting to audition for the general director. And if you sing the 2 arias, you know, like nobody else, you get the job, and there you go. But for a conductor, you know, I hear from young conductors, well, no one wants to hire me unless they see me, but no one sees me if I don't get hired. And you know, it's not like I can audition with an entire symphony orchestra. You know, what advice do you have for the aspiring conductor in that regard?
Well, I have a colleague who is a set designer, and I work with him here at the university. And he spent his early years in New York assisting everybody he could. He got every assistant job he could on Broadway and in New York theater. And that would be my advice for young conductors. Besides, you know, I think it's hard to just get in. Well, first of all, you could start your own company and do your own thing. And I had friends that did that. You know, they would get an orchestra and a cast together, and they'd go to Carnegie Hall and do one performance on a Sunday afternoon. That would work, or it wouldn't. You know, I mean, it's very hard to get noticed. For me, I was an assistant, and unbelievable opportunities came my way because of fate. Yep. And then I proved that I could do it, and then I got rehired.
So the assistant role is really
right.
important.
I would say prepare, be impeccably well prepared, work really hard. If you have that fire and the talent to do it, just make sure you're ready when the iron strikes. And there are many other ways. I mean, you know, the symphonic way was to be an assistant, and lots of orchestras do hire assistants and have people to do their educational programs or be an assistant to and they cover all of the sort of main series concerts. They learn a lot of repertoire. I would say learn repertoire. If you want to be an opera conductor, well, you know, it's hard. It's easier to do it if you're a pianist, because that kind of gives you an you get into the room that way. Yeah. Yeah. But if you're not, and you love opera, and there's lots. I mean, Ado Devart was an oboe player, and he's a brilliant opera conductor. There's lots of ways to do it. Giulini was a violist. You know, you don't have to be a pianist necessarily, but I would say, you know, those are some thoughts.
Yep, absolutely. No, those are valuable.
Be aggressive and go after it, and know that, you know, you might not get that opportunity, and an opportunity, no matter how small, is an opportunity. Take it. Don't don't be like saying I'm above this.
Yeah,
So.
yeah. You know, you've talked about Butterfly and Daughter of the Regiment and standard repertoire, and my familiarity with your work has tended to be around American opera.
Yeah.
And, you know, it's one thing to perform an opera that has an inherited performance practice. You know, this is how it's been done since Puccini's day or since Donizetti's day. And different, of course, when you're doing a new work or doing a work by Carlyle or Leonard Bernstein or some of the other contemporary composers you've conducted. As an artist, you know, how are you fulfilled differently doing works from the inherited repertoire versus new work?
Well, you know, first of all, established repertoire has been in a process of being reviewed and re-seen because of the rise of the opera directors, the stage directors, and of which, you know, there've been so many really excellent people. And I always love it when I'm getting into a situation with a director who's extremely creative and who wants to try to not do something standard. And I think those worlds of new work and the more theater-centric approach to works has kind of melded in with the approach to standard operas. So I don't think I was ever sort of the perfect person to go to companies that tended to just view traditional opera as a kind of an opportunity to do Bohème the way it's supposed to be done, or Tosca the way it's supposed to be done. So I certainly respect all of those traditions, and I always love doing it. But I guess it comes down to the words and what are people saying and what are they meaning. And I guess why I love musical theater is that it kind of sprouts more from the text than it does from the notes or the singing. And what I don't like about opera is when it is entirely sonic based, and never idea and communication and sentence based. You know, what are you saying? What are you meaning? How are you showing that as an actor? I mean, I think we still have a very long way to go in our training of opera singers. I mean, I do really feel like everybody should take acting classes that they don't sing in. I don't feel like if sometimes the voice tends to overwhelm, especially if you have a great one, it ends up being the dominant factor in your work. And whereas I think every person that gets on stage telling a story, the story should be the dominant factor in their work, not their singing. And so, and you know, there's so many different people. It's such a rich and infinite universe of all the different kinds of talents there are and the way people approach the work. And I'm right now working on a production of Sweeney Todd with a very good friend who's runs a theater company here in town. We're doing it for Opera Omaha next February. And I've done numerous productions with her of plays with music. And she's a real theater person. And she looks at it. It's so different walking into a theater company than it is walking into an opera company. Although opera companies have changed enormously and have become more like theatrically based, less traditionally based, less hierarchical, because you know, the diva system and the whole idea of that was there when I first started in 1980. It's changing, but I really, that's what I think. I mean, it's harder to do it in a language that's not your own. It takes a lot of work to really know. I mean, everybody does their translation, but it's really different working in a language that is not your first language. So
of course, new operas over the last several decades, it's not just, you know, the most recent decade, certainly are exploring opera's theatrical side more than did the bel canto operas or some of the operas of the 19th century. Yes.
Yeah, no question. You know, composers, librettists, Gene Shear's a good friend of mine. A wonderful actor. I've done a couple of shows with him, and and so happy for the success he's had with his collaborations with some of our really fine new opera composers. Maybe not new anymore, but like you say, the last 20, 30 years. Yeah, they have a different, the prize at the end of all of this is very different for them than it was earlier.
Yeah.
They have, we know in America that more people love musical theater than love opera. And musical theater is amazing. It's not just, you know, tap dance numbers. It's so varied and so creative. And lots of our great directors that come to the Met now, you know, come from Broadway. Mm-hmm. And so, you know, those composers know that audiences have a different expectation. And it's hard because they're trying to do it in a way that I think musical theater doesn't do it, which is that the sophistication of the scores they're writing is far greater than, they're not writing musical numbers. Mm-hmm. They're writing through composed sonic creations.
Yep.
They're writing for voices that are going to go above the clef, you know, they're going to sing higher, which is not where people talk. And so they have a different thing to get that same kind of excitement, theatrical storytelling excitement across to an audience then. Yeah. And so I admire all of them that want to do that. Yeah. Because I think that's the point is, can you just thrill an audience with your storytelling? That's it. Yeah. That's the whole thing.
You know, you've mentioned John Dumaine, John Nelson, Carlisle, others. Are there other role models, whether you knew them or not, but people whose work you said, I want to do what that person is doing, either as an opera company artistic director or as a conductor? Are there other reference points you've had in your great career?
Well, that's a hard question to answer. I would say, this is the kind of question that makes my mind go blank, just because I can't grab hold of it. Because I'm sure I have heroes that are not involved in opera, right? So, you know, quite honestly, my life now is so different than it was when I was really doing opera a lot. And our world has changed so drastically. It's, you know, it's a really tough time right now to imagine, not only for the arts, but for every single one of us. You know, it's like, where are we going next?
I wanted to explore that with you some, because in reading your bio and a couple of interviews with you, you really are an active citizen artist. And you are not isolated in your studio, but you are working in your community, you're working to address community issues. And I'm fascinated by the intersection of the artist as active citizen. And I don't necessarily mean activist by that, but I mean, active citizen. So how have you blended active citizenship with your work as an artist?
Well, I had a period in which I really got to be very involved in the community here in Omaha, where I now live. And that came out of being the artistic director of Opera Omaha. That sort of melding of that between working with Jane Hill and Joan Dessens, who were the two directors that I worked with, and doing outreach programs and things like that. And then really getting to know the community better and to see how the social service community and the arts community were kind of natural companions, because one was good at putting on kind of events and shows, and the other was really good at contacting and doing something that would directly help other people. So I've always wanted to see the arts be elevated from an elitist platform to a more community-centric platform. And so I was fortunate to be involved in a number of kind of different kinds of things. I was a member of a church, and we had a food pantry, and we were connected to a network of food pantries through the state, and we did a number of sort of performances to benefit that, and that became a natural thing to do. And it led me to become more of a part of this community, which I greatly appreciated, being able to do outdoor concerts that anybody could come to. There's still so far to go. Right now I'm working with one of our high schools that's in South Omaha, which is a largely Latino community, and they have the arts magnet is there, and they're working on a lot of really interesting things. Each time I get to do one of these things, I feel richer for it. What I'm doing at the university now is trying to get more students to know about our programs and to find ways to get them into college and to, sort of bridge some divides. We have a lot of divides where you still go to a symphony or an opera performance and you're seeing almost entirely white audiences. And so there's a lot to do. I applaud the Opera Omaha Holland Fellowship Program, which is kind of broke some new ground with Roger White's and sort of creating this idea that we are really arts people. We're not opera people. So we are encouraging creativity, and we are, and even through the mediums of music and singing and storytelling. That's a really great thing. And so I had no grand plan, and I'm not a saint. There's lots of times I'm not like at an event or something like that. I do have a life, and I sort of want to live it. But I think it's a privilege, and I was privileged to be in a position where I got invited to be involved in things, and in many cases I took the invitation.
Yeah, it's just beautifully put, beautifully put. I was reading about a number of your honors of, honorary doctorates and things like that. And one I needed to ask you about, which is the Admiralty in the Nebraska Navy.
Yeah.
Now, it seems to me to be a dubious distinction to be an admiral in the Navy where there's no water.
Yes. And I think that's the point. But I do want to say that the life that I was talking about has been for 10 years with a wonderful woman, Judy Goshkabash, who's my partner, and she works as she's the director of the Nebraska Commission on Indian Affairs, and she works at the state capitol. And she's been working there for 25 years, and she's a very influential woman. And I've learned, since I was honored by then Lieutenant Governor Dave Heineman, who then became the governor, on stage before HMS Pinafore, given this admiralty, which I knew nothing about, and I thought it was a big deal. Lo and behold, my wonderful sweetheart, Judy, gives out an admiralty to someone almost every week. But deservedly so. And that's probably an exaggeration, not every week. But yesterday she was giving an admiralty to someone who was retiring from the Lincoln Journal-Star. And so thanks for asking about that. Yes, there are lakes, there are boats. There is a USS Nebraska. That's yes. And I don't know the origin of the Admiralty. There are a number of real admirals here in Nebraska who I know, but there's a lot of us that are landlocked, honorary somethings. I don't know what it is, but yeah, that was a nice thing Joan Dessens did back a while back, and I appreciated it. Yeah.
Well, the next time I see you, I will absolutely salute you and fly a naval flag or in your honor. I'm so grateful for your time today, just to hear your personal story, which I think has lessons for everybody rising in our field, and your memory, your connection to some of the greats who, really were at the birth of American opera back in the 70s and 80s. So Hal, thank you for taking this time. Thanks for everything that you've done and that you do. And I just wish you good luck in this coming season, whatever, however this coming season unfolds. I wish you health and happiness throughout it.
Mark, I'm grateful for our friendship and very proud of your long tenure and what you've done for opera. And so you honored me by including me in this, and I thank you.
Thank you. Have a good rest of your day.
You too. Bye-bye.
Thanks.